Welcome to the Explainer. Have you ever looked at a massive new highway or airport and just wondered, how on earth does something like that get built, especially in a place like Nepal? Well, today we're pulling back the curtain on the strategic blueprint that makes it all happen. Yeah, it's a huge question, right? Because these projects, they're not just built on good intentions or wishful thinking. There's a really sophisticated framework behind the scenes that turns a big national ambition into, actual concrete and steel. So let's kick things off by talking about the absolute foundation of any project: investment. Okay, first things first, we've got to kind of reset our definition of investment. Because when we're talking about massive infrastructure, it goes way, way beyond just the money. So usually when you think about the cost of a project, your mind probably jumps to two things. First, there's the big upfront chunk of cash you need to actually build the thing. That's called capital expenditure, or CapEx. And then you've got all the day-to-day costs to keep it running. Salaries, maintenance, that's your operating expense, or OpEx. But here's the thing, that's really just scratching the surface. Real investment is so much bigger. Think about it. It's the brain power and skills of the team, right? The human capital. It's the thousands of hours they pour into it. It's also about having the guts to accept and manage the risks involved. Plus, you're investing in new tech to be more efficient and making sure the whole thing actually lines up with what the country needs and, is socially and environmentally responsible. But at the end of the day, it all boils down to one single word: confidence. An investor, whether it's the government or a private company, has to believe. They have to be sure that all of those resources, the money, the time, the effort, are going to pay off. They need to see a predictable, positive return. If that confidence isn't there, the project is dead in the water. It just won't happen. Okay, so that's the what. But what about the how? How do you take a raw idea, let's say we need a new highway, and turn it into a solid, structured project that someone would actually want to invest in? Well, that's where project management comes in. It's the discipline, the framework that takes that initial concept, puts it through the ringer, screens it, checks if it's even feasible, and then shapes it into a detailed, actionable plan with really clear goals. And in Nepal, this isn't just some abstract idea. The whole process is guided by some really important laws, like the Public-Private Partnership and Investment Act. The entire point of this act is to create a stable, predictable environment, one that makes both the public and private sectors feel comfortable enough to team up on these massive projects. All right, so you've got all these potential projects floating around. How do you keep them organized? How do you prioritize? Well, Nepal uses a really cool concept called a project bank, and trust me, it's a total game changer for strategic development. Now, don't let the name fool you. It's not a bank full of cash. It's better to think of it like a secure treasury or a systematic pipeline. It's basically a curated portfolio of projects that have already been vetted, planned out, and are officially stamped development ready. They're sitting there, ready to go, just waiting for the right investor to come along and press play. And a project doesn't just randomly show up in this bank. Oh no, it has to go on a whole journey. It starts with initiation, defining the goals and scope. Then comes the deep dive planning phase. After that, implementation, where the work gets done. And finally, and this is super important, completion and review, where everyone looks back and figures out what worked, what didn't, and learns from it for next time. And who runs this whole show? Well, there's a central body, like the Investment Board of Nepal, that manages the entire system. And this is key because it makes sure that all these projects are actually aligned with the country's bigger goals. It helps put resources where they're needed most, manage risks before they become huge problems, and it makes the whole process transparent and accountable. Okay, so let's recap. We've got this awesome pipeline of projects, all vetted and ready to go. That's great, but there's a big elephant in the room. Building this stuff costs an insane amount of money. So, where does that money come from? Especially when public funds are already stretched thin. This is a massive challenge for so many countries. And the answer, more often than not, is collaboration. Specifically a model we call a public-private partnership, or PPP for short. So what is a PPP? At its core, it's a strategic team-up. It's like the government and a private company form a long-term alliance. They sign a contract to share the work, the costs, and, crucially, the risks of financing, building, and running a huge project that, frankly, neither of them could pull off on their own. And this is where the magic happens, because each side brings what the other one needs. The public sector, the government, provides things like policy support, investment security, and access to public land. Meanwhile, the private sector comes to the table with the big bucks, the investment capital, plus the technical know-how, and the drive for efficiency to get the job done on time and on budget. But here's the thing. PPP isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. There are different ways to structure these partnerships, and you can tailor the model to fit the exact needs of the project. And this is what I mean by flexible. Look at these models. For something huge like an airport, you might use what's called a build, operate, transfer, or BOT model. The private company builds it, they run it for, say, 30 years, and then they transfer it back to the government. For a power plant, maybe a build, own, operate model makes more sense, where the private company owns it for the long haul. Or for something like a public service like waste management, you could just have a management contract, where the private company brings its expertise to run the show, but doesn't take on all the financial risk. Okay, so we've talked about a few different pieces here. Let's put the puzzle together and see how these three big ideas, investment, the project bank, and PPPs, all connect to create one powerful system. First up, you have investment. This is the fuel. It's what powers the entire process. And remember, we're not just talking about money, we're talking about skills, time, and expertise too. Okay, so you've got the fuel. But that fuel is useless without a high-performance engine. That's the project bank. It's the system that takes all those potential projects and gets them tuned up, making them efficient, strategic, and ready to go. And finally, you need a vehicle to actually get you where you're going. The public-private partnership, the PPP, is that vehicle. It's the framework that gets the public and private sectors in the driver's seat together to actually build the thing. So there you have it, the fuel, the engine, and the vehicle. When you put them all together, you get this really comprehensive framework for building a nation's infrastructure. It's an integrated approach that holds a ton of promise. And it really leaves us with one big question to think about. Just how effectively can this blueprint be used to build Nepal's future?